Everyone must be asking you a lot of things about Animoca, but for the purpose of this conversation, we would like to keep it more towards the side that people don't know much. A lot of people don't know it, but your parents were musicians and you yourself are a musician. So how true is that? One of the facts that our team got regarding you was you're on the BAFTA board as well.
I am on the board.
So we'd love to know a bit more about that. How's the experience and how does that contribute? How do you see the relationship between music and NFTs?
Endless stories about how the manager basically misappropriates this funny stuff, basically takes advantage of the ignorance of artists. This is music, film, or any craft that you do.
Fusion of Web2 and Web3, DAO structure to be coming in, having some set of rules, how these DAO members have to behave.
Schools don't run democratically. Really, even families arguably are not run democratically, depending on what kind of family. Asian tiger parenting.
Yet I'll take this honor to start this off. Everyone must be asking you a lot of things about Animoca, but for the purpose of this conversation, we would like to keep it more towards the side that people don't know much. We'll talk about Animoca, but a little bit the other side as well.
Sure.
So to start off, what we have got to know is, when a lot of people don't know it, but your parents were musicians and you yourself are a musician. So how true is that?
Yes, sure. In another life, I was a musician. So my parents were basically immigrants coming from the Greater China space into Austria. So I was born and raised in Vienna, and both of them went there to study music. And this was they met in the 60s. I guess they got together, and I was born in the 70s. So now I'm totally dating myself, having seen many iterations of, I guess, both the cycles of what's happened in the last 50 years. Oh my goodness. Anyway, one of the things that happens when you have Asian parents that are musicians, and I'm an only child, is of course they make your child study music.
Yeah.
And I guess there's some empathy around, I think, everyone here that Asian tiger parenting, it's a reality for all of us, right? So I studied music. I went to the conservatory. And I think that part of my life was really one where I just basically sort of stumbled into something that, because my mom really wanted me to study music. And so I studied piano, flute, and cello. My mom was an opera singer first, then afterwards went and became an opera director. I would say the thing that was most formative for me wasn't necessarily learning the instruments. Learning instruments for me was more about discipline, because it's practice. So I certainly learned that. The second thing that I think I learned was that, because my mom was working back then Europe was divided basically really between East and West. And so I ended up visiting my mom, who used to work at the eastern side of Berlin, at the Komische Oper. And I saw, real communism, right? None of the stuff that people talk about socialism today think what it is. Real communism looked very differently. So I saw that part of the world, which kind of had sort of an impression on me as well, in terms of some of the issues that later on in my life would have an impact that I didn't really realize as a child. And it's also because of music that I got into technology, not by sort of intention. It was more like I wasn't really as talented and as good as my fellow students. So for composition, I guess I cheated. I wrote composition software on the Atari ST, and I published the software on a pre-internet service called CompuServe. And for those who might remember, in the 80s, CompuServe was basically sort of a very primitive way to connect online. You used acoustic couplers and modems. And I uploaded the software, and people on CompuServe appreciated it, ultimately started sending me money. I was a kid, so I didn't have a bank account. So that was my first experience. And then Atari basically came knocking and said, "Oh, would you like to have an opportunity here? Because we wrote software that people appreciated." And they didn't realize that I was a child, nor did they realize that I was basically an immigrant. Like, all these things didn't matter because they just cared about sort of, what I was able to do. And that was kind of maybe really the first proper introduction, I would say, of a kind of pre-metaversal, pre-internet experience, that you can have these type of connections virtually. Of course, we didn't say virtual, that word didn't exist, but, for all intents and purposes, they were strangers. And for those who will remember, in CompuServe, we didn't even have names. Our email address was a number, right? You were like 6760035, whatever, right?
Yeah.
That was our ID. And through that, I guess kind of anonymous ID, I ended up creating a profile. It led me to a job at Atari, and it led me basically to enter the technology space, properly, and eventually moving to the US as well. So yeah, I would say music did give me that path, although it wasn't as a musician. And if I didn't have this experience, then I wouldn't be where I am today, probably.
Pretty interesting. I mean, new information to me, to be honest. One of the facts that our team got regarding you was you're on the BAFTA board as well.
I am on the board.
So we'd love to know a bit more about that. How's the experience, and how does that contribute?
Well, I suppose BAFTA, which is the British Academy for Film and Television Awards. Now they also do video game awards and so on as well. So that's actually how it started. And my role really was to help sort of bring BAFTA to Asia, right? And together with other people to sort of expand that audience. BAFTA is a nonprofit, and its real mission is basically to expand sort of, the film and media relationships, or generally media relationships between, I guess, British film and television and the rest of the world. And, we can certainly agree that, the UK has a major impact, with the Royal Academy and sort of films and movies and music in the world. And so we really started off as giving scholarships, exchange programs. So the idea was, how can we bring people from Asia to sort of Europe and vice versa through these scholarship programs? That's how it started. For myself, it gave me exposure a little bit in terms of the space. Obviously, the BAFTA building is nice as well. We had opportunities to meet with actors and so on, but that's not really the main thing. The main thing is about sort of how we basically sort of create more common bonds and sort of share expertise and sort of basically sort of build sort of, I guess, greater relationships in terms of the exchange of, I guess, this sort of art medium.
How much time do you get to game now? Do you game regularly?
I wish I could game more.
Console, computer?
Console almost very rarely, only because it's hard to carry a console around. So mobile, PC on occasion. Obviously games that, I do like to play our own games as well, because I like to test everything and figure out. But broadly speaking, I would play with my kids. I think games is one of the great ways in which we can interact remotely in a more immersive way that we couldn't really do before. If you talk about physical interaction, you had to be physically present. Now we can have kind of the same emotional bonds, but in the virtual plane with video games.
Got it. I'll just continue with the tone that we set for music.
Sure.
Just a very quick question. How do you see the relationship between music and NFTs?
Well, first, I think music still represents a creative industry. So whether this is film or gaming or art, and the person that it serves is the creator. And so I think one of the things that I also saw, and this is the story of my mother really, as an artist, she was always taken advantage of. But she wasn't taken advantage of because she, just because of her situation. She was taken advantage of because she didn't know anything about money. And the classic thing that happens often in the creative industries, and the agents and the managers in between is like, you don't need to worry about money. I'll take care of this. You just worry about doing art. You just worry about your craft. Indeed, there are many, many stories, endless stories about how the manager basically misappropriates or does funny stuff or basically takes advantage of the ignorance of the artist. This is true for music, film, for any craft that you can think of. And that was certainly true for my mom. She was taken advantage of. She didn't know how to renegotiate her contracts. She didn't really know the classic commercial aspects that I guess we take for granted in our space. And I think this is part of financial literacy. So the relationship here, I guess, is when we think about music and NFTs. NFTs represent digital property, but they represent essentially contract rights as well. Right? So if I have an NFT, it can be representative of royalties. It can be representative of, basically original content or basically of art or of music in this case. And in order to issue an NFT successfully, you need to understand these aspects of financial literacy. Right? You can't issue an NFT and just expect it to sell just because it looks nice or it sounds nice.
Definitely.
Because actually the business model effectively is embedded within it.
Exactly.
And it exposes it. This is a beautiful thing about blockchain. It exposes the entire transactional and financial layer to the whole world, which means that not only do you get to see it, but anyone else outside gets to see it. And it forces middlemen and intermediaries and agents to basically act honestly. So if you look at, for instance, what's happening now with the whole sort of royalty issues, right? Well, there's been royalty issues in the music industry forever.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. But they all happen in closed doors.
That's right.
The artist never has a chance to even complain because the big studio, big publishers and labels, Spotify, they negotiate and say, don't say anything or else, whatever. So we never know. So every person who listens to music doesn't actually know that there's an issue.
Correct.
But on blockchain, everything is on chain.
Exactly.
Right? So, and it's not the artist necessarily that has to say anything because they see everything. So whether there is royalties or not, that's a different story. But the fact that you can have the conversation in the open is what changes. Now, imagine what would happen in the music industry if all the royalty discussions of all the labels and Spotify's in the world was actually in public domain, and that we could actually see everything. Our relationship probably to the creators and the way we engage or wish to engage may change as well, and the opportunities will open up as well, because third parties might say, I have a better deal for you.
Exactly.
I mean, that's what happened with Web 1. Web 1 really was an intermediary for physical items or physical goods. For instance, if you're a farmer in India, right, you actually would be able to get the fair price of your goods because you can now go online and see what it actually was sold for in America or in Europe.
Yep.
But for decades, you had no idea. You didn't know. Only the middlemen knew because you never knew what maybe your cotton was sold for, or you never knew what your rice was sold for.
So, again, I mean, it's a personal question from my end, and I've been talking to this with a lot of people. I personally feel that, I mean, I have been Web3 all my life, whatever life I had. But the thing is that I still feel there's a definite need of the fusion of Web 2 and Web 3. I mean, you can't get to have adoption coming in. I mean, we all have been looking out for that adoption. One of my friends, he was just joking and saying that I've been hearing this for the past 5 years that we are still early. When are we gonna be late? So that brings me to my question that what do you feel about it? As in, like, do you think Web3 is gonna be independently existing, or do we need like that Web 3.5 coming in that's a fusion of Web 2 and Web 3 or something like that?
So my view on this one is that ultimately Web 2 will be replaced by Web 3. So, and there will be maybe there'll be elements of that will exist in the same way that, radio is not dead, right?
Yeah,
but it's, and has some relevance, but it is not the primary medium. And then it was replaced by TV, and then replaced basically by online. So these are the type of evolutions that I think will take place. The reason why I think this is going to happen is because the value shift between Web 2 and Web 3 is just so enormous. Once you enter, I mean, even today, say what you will about the fact that NFT markets have declined, which we know they have, it's still billions of dollars. And if you're a musician, you make more money with NFTs than on Spotify. 100%. So therefore, just on that account, why would you actually really just depend on the business on Spotify as an example, right? So I think in that paradigm, it's natural to have that shift. But how do we get that shift? There's an interesting chart that was published even by major institutions like Morgan Stanley and so on, that showed that the Web 3 adoption was very similar to the Web 1 adoption. So by their estimates, we are roughly in the year 2000, maybe even 2001, right? Which is kind of, relevant. And by that, I mean Web 3 on-chain. So I don't mean stuff that's in exchanges.
Yeah, of course.
Because, there's no big difference between a major exchange and Robinhood, right? In that sense, right? It's really, and you're also doing it for one purpose, which is basically to trade. You're not actually using it for the utility. So when I speak of this, I speak of on-chain activity. The on-chain activity, for instance, in DeFi, is still about $100+ billion a month, right? And, the entire ecosystem is, basically still worth over $1 trillion. Yes, most of it is Bitcoin, but it's still basically giving that underpinning of that value. The amount of treasuries that are sitting in DAOs, decentralized autonomous organization, is $18 billion now, up from $12 billion at the start of the year, which were all basically community run. Right? I mean, that's the other thing that's also different. You basically, it's not only having sort of, benefits to broader communities because you use blockchain, you actually have community run treasuries that are not run by large organizations, for instance. So all these factors actually provide for new avenues of growth.
Mm.
But I think the issue about adopting from sort of in Web3, unlike Web1, which is a physical issue of internet connection, broadband connection, in Web3 is around financial literacy.
DAO structure to be coming in, having some set of rules, how these DAO members have to behave,
Sure.
what they have to do, what they take in consideration while implementing any of the decisions, right? And at the end of the day, it's still democratized.
I think the thing that sort of is exciting about DAOs is that we can now iterate on democratic principles at the pace of technology. Couldn't really do this before. Because if you iterate on your government, it could have very disastrous outcomes,
Exactly.
right? And companies don't run democratically.
Yeah.
Schools don't run democratically. Really, even families arguably are not run democratically, depending on what kind of family, Asian tiger parenting. So consequently, we don't get to practice our democratic muscle much at all. And I think this is an interesting pathway as well. We've only, we've started to appreciate democracy really only fairly recently in human history. And it's coming to its limitations as well when you think about what's happened recently with social media and so on. So again, I think blockchain provides a really interesting long-term solution for that.